Hello and welcome to the first episode of MTG Deck Tech. Today we're going to take a deep dive into Boros Feather. So Boros Feather is a deck I played a lot last season. I got Mythic with it, high Mythic. I was on the cusp of breaking the top 1000. I was ranked 800 a few days, but then I choked at the end of the season, so I didn't get to Mythic qualifier. But as you can see, I got ranked Platinum this season, which is the rank you get when you finish Mythic. So what we're gonna do in this series is take a deep dive into decks I play, and that I'm gonna look at every card in the deck, tell you what it's gonna do in different situations. I'm also gonna do a video where I'm playing the deck, but that will be another video for another day. In this video, I want to concentrate only on what this deck does. So, this is Boros Feather. It's a deck that is very popular, I guess. This is my version of it, and I want to show you what it can do, what will be the hardships that you encounter. Specifically, Teferi Time Raveler will destroy your deck in almost every matchup. But let's first look on the broad picture of this deck. So we have an average mana cost of 1.7, so you have a very aggressive deck. You can see the highest mana cost you have is a 3 mana cost, and you have white and red in the deck. That's why it's called Boros Feather. And you have 22 lands, so you have a fairly aggressive deck. You will be able to do late game stuff with this deck, which is very important. This is a deck where you can win in 5 rounds, but you can also win in 20 or 30 rounds, depending on the matchup. So what does this deck do? Before we go into the nitty gritty of every card, you can see here the most important card of the deck. It's Feather the Redeemed. That's why it's called the Feather deck. This creature has the ability to bring back spells that target your own creatures. And this card is gonna bring these spells back at the end of the round. So whenever you cast a spell that targets your creature, you will have this card back, bring it back at the end of your round, particularly in the beginning of the end step. So let's say you have a God's Willing, you cast it on 10th District Legionnaire and protect it against something, and then Feather the Redeemed will bring God's Willing back at the end of the round. You will have to let the spell resolve in order to get it back. So this is the first thing you will have to keep in mind. So if the spell is countered, you will not get it back at the end of the round. If the creature that is targeted by your spell is dead before you can resolve this spell, you will also not get it back at the end of the round. So you will have to not only protect Feather against removal spells, but you will also have to protect your pump spells or your Reckless Rages against stuff that will counter it. So we will have a mana base that is mostly consistent of planes, because planes are more important, because you will need 2 planes to cast Feather the Redeemed and also to cast Gideon Blackblade. You will have to have some mountain cards, because you have a lot of red cards that are very important in the deck. I have some Clifftop Retreats 3 off. You could also take 4 off, but as you can see, I only own 3 off, but it works. I got to Mythic with this deck, so it's not that important to have the perfect mana base. Sacred Foundry is of course also a good card. You can pay 2 life to get it into the battlefield untapped, which is also very nice. It is also considered mountains and plains, so you can use it to have Clifftop Retreat get into the battlefield untapped. I also have Temple of Triumph 4 off. You can scry with this card, so you can choose which card you're gonna have next. Scrying is a very important concept for this deck, as many cards in this deck have this Scry effect, which will give you the ability to always have at least a somewhat good card on the top of your library. So if you don't need another land, you can scry away the land. If you don't need, I don't know, some card Adanto Vanguard or anything, you can scry that away with a lot of scry cards in your deck. I also have this Wind-Scarred Crag to give you some life. You will need a lot of life against burn decks, which is why I have some life gain against the mono-red aggressive strategies. And yeah, this is the mana base of the deck. Let's just start going through one by one what each card in this deck does. Here we have Defiant Strike. Defiant Strike is a card that most people who play Boros Feather put in 4 of. I only put 2 of, but I'm also just shuffling around a bit. Sometimes I have 3 of in the deck, sometimes I have 2. It's an important card because it not only pumps your creature by +1, +0, it also draws you a card. And drawing cards is of course very nice. You will always be able to find some new cards you need, and this will help you with this deck to stay relevant in the late game. And as I said, it also pumps your creature for 1 turn. It synergizes very well with Dreadhorde Arcanist because it can bring it back. It synergizes well with 10th District Legionnaire because it pumps it permanently and temporarily. It also synergizes well with Krenko because Krenko creates creatures based on its power, and of course it synergizes with Feather because Feather brings it back, and it's an instant, so you will be able to play it while in combat, which is a very important mechanic for this deck. You will always have to have combat tricks ready to outplay your opponents, which is something you can do very well with this deck. Outplay opponents in the combat phase. This will be the most important thing, to play these instants in the combat phase in the precise order you will need to play it, and not screw this up to get into higher ranks. I also have Gird of Battle in this deck. I've seen decks that play 2 of them, 3 of them. I don't particularly like this card because it's a sorcery, which is of course not what you want to do generally with this deck. You want to play instant cards. You will be able to bring it back with Feather, but you will not be able to play it twice, like in the opponent's turn and your turn, because it's a sorcery. You will also not use it as a combat trick because it is sorcery speed. What it does do is it puts permanent counters on up to 2 creatures, which is very nice to pump up your creatures indefinitely. If you have a Feather and a Gird for Battle, you can do some shenanigans, make the creatures really, really strong. So that's why I have 1-off in the deck. I like the 1-offs. You will see I have many 1-offs here in the deck. 1-offs just give you the ability to have 1 card exactly when you need it at some points, but you will not use as many deck slots to have a card that is not very good in the most circumstances. 1 card which is good in almost every circumstance is God's Willing. This is the card that single-handedly got this deck into S tier with the release of M20, so it's very, very important. It gives a target creature you control protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. And it also scries. There's the scry effect again, which I mentioned already. So protection means you cannot block this creature with the color of your choice. You cannot... and this also goes for creatures with more than 1 color. You just have to select 1 color, select the color where you think, for example, if there's some red in the creature, I always select the red because your opponent might have burn spells, or if it's black, it's even more important to select the black. You will have to time this card very well, because, for example, if you play this card, protect your creature against something, your opponent can instant cast like a shock or something before the protection kicks in. So you always have to watch, can my opponent do something when I play this card? If not, you might want to change your way you play your card, the sequencing. Protection is, you can use it before combat to let your opponent not block, for example, a big 10th District Legionnaire that you have, or you can use it during combat to, like, combat trick, to be able to damage an opponent's creature that is blocking, but also not die. Or pump your 10th District Legionnaire while in combat or something. You can do many things with God's Willing, so this is the most important, one of the most important cards in the deck. What God's Willing will not do is protect you against board wipes. So if your opponent plays a Kaya's Wrath, it is not targeting your creature. So you are not protected from the color because it doesn't target you. For targeted removal, for example, cast down, murder, or something like that, you can use God's Willing. It's very good to protect you. But it's not that great against board wipes like Kaya's Wrath. But yeah, most of the times you will have targeted removal against your creatures. So that's why God's Willing is the most important card to keep your creatures safe. I will always want to play, when I play Feather, I will always want to have either God's Willing or Shattering Light to protect it in the next turn. So you mostly cast Feather when you have 4 mana, although it's a free mana spell, just to have 1 white mana to protect it. Sometimes if you have, for example, 2 Feathers in your hand, it doesn't matter really. You can just hard cast it with 3 mana, it's okay. But most of the times you want to protect it with God's Willing or Shattering Light. Moment of Triumph is a card which is very nice for the life gain. You gain 2 life, and you also pump your creature for 1 turn in +2/+2, which is much more than Defiant Strike, but you will not get the card draw. This is why it's always hard to choose between Moment of Triumph and Defiant Strike. You see here it's an excellent card, so it will cycle. It will not be playable after this month in Standard. So when the new set Aldrain or Aldran kicks in, you will not have this card. But it's not that important to break the deck. More important is the Shattering Light. If this is not reprinted, we will have a problem. Target creature gets indestructible until the end of the turn, so it will not protect you against bounce effects, so unsummon, for example, to return your cards to your hand. This will not protect it against that, but you will be protected against board wipes like Kaya's Wrath. This is why we have both God's Willing and Shattering Light in this deck, to protect you against the board wipes in case you draw Shattering Light. But you cannot protect yourself against blocks with it, to make your creature unblockable like God's Willing, which is why God's Willing is overall a better card, and we have 4 of God's Willing in the deck. And now we have another card that's gonna rotate that will probably make this deck unplayable, or might be making it unplayable until something similar comes around. Reckless Rage is your main form of removal in the deck. It deals 4 damage to opponent's creature and 2 damage to your own creature. So as it targets your own creature, you can bring it back with Feather. This is why Reckless Rage is so great in this deck. And it also pumps 10th District Legionnaire, which we will get to in a few cards. And you will have the chance to get rid of almost any medium-sized creature with this card. It will of course not help you that much against very big creatures. You will need to have 2 Reckless Rages or something. But with red cards, it's almost anything you can hope for. It only costs 1 mana, so you can bring it back with Dreadhorde Arcanist and something like that. So it's a very nice card in the format. It's very important to have Reckless Rages to kick your opponent's creatures out of the deck. Another form, or the only other form really of removal in the deck, is a Shock. And a Shock deals 2 damage to any target. It does cost only 1 mana, so you can bring it back with Dreadhorde Arcanists, in comparison to like things like a Lightning Strike, which would not be able to be brought back by Dreadhorde Arcanists. So you have possibly the option to play it multiple times. You need Shock because one, it's very inexpensive, very cheap. You can use it while you don't have creatures on the battlefield. So in contrast to Reckless Rage, you can use it almost any time. Another thing is that it's instant, which is always great, which also has the same effect as Reckless Rage. You can play it almost any time if the opponent doesn't have Teferi Time Raveler on the field. And you will also be able to use it against Planeswalkers. So you can not only attack creatures with this in comparison to Reckless Rage, but you will also be able to use it against Planeswalkers. Next up we have the 10th District Legionnaire, which is one of the most important cards in the deck. It has haste, which is very nice. So it can attack the turn you play it. And you will also be able to put +1/+1 counters on it for each card that targets it that you play. So you can pump it with God's Willing, Shattering Light, Moment of Triumph, all these cards, which we previously discussed. All these cards pump 10th District Legionnaire. It also scries 1 every time it gets pumped. So that is amazing to get card advantage. If you, for example, have 1 white mana at the end of your opponent's turn, you can set a stop at the second main phase of your opponent, and you can play something like God's Willing on it, and you have 2 scries. So if your first card doesn't suit you, you can scry it away. If the second card doesn't suit you as well, you can also scry it away. So you'll have many scry opportunities to get the card you need in your matchup. You'll also, of course, have to watch out if your opponent can kill any of your creatures before playing God's Willing on the 10th District Legionnaire at the end of the turn, but most of the times it will be possible. So 10th District Legionnaire is one of the most important cards. You will have to protect it. You will most likely play it when you have many of them in your hand, or if you have a God's Willing to protect it. Preferably you will have the feather out before you play the 10th District Legionnaire, but if it's not possible, it's okay. It's not like the end of the world if one of them gets killed, but you will be trying to protect it as best as possible because it's such a powerful card in this deck. Next, I have one of Gideon Blackblade. Gideon Blackblade is a card that not many feathered decks play, but some do, and I think it works very well with the deck. Because once it is a creature that's 4/4, that's indestructible at your turn, which is always a nice thing. It can also exile a target non-land permanent in some cases, and that will be an ability which is not used very often because it costs 6 loyalty, and you will have to get it to 6 loyalty first, which is very difficult with Gideon Blackblade. But you can also target your creature and give it Vigilance, Lifelink, or Indestructible until the end of the turn. And this will be a very nice addition to have, particularly for the Lifelink. You can pump a creature with Lifelink and just be able to withstand some of the burn spells that your opponent might have, or some of the board presence that your opponent might have, just to gain some time to get your very important spells like Feather into the battlefield. So Gideon Blackblade is a very nice addition. It does cost 2 white mana and a generic mana, so it's a bit hard to cast, but it should be okay for the most situations. And it can make you be so versatile with your creatures because, of course, Vigilance can be used to have a blocker and also attack. And Indestructible is always a nice thing if you don't have cards like Sheltering Light in your hand, for example. And it just gives you so many opportunities to play with your cards on the board better. It does not pump 10th District Legionnaire because it's not a spell, it's just an ability. But it's very nice and very good to play Gideon Blackblade. You will always have some nice cards, even if you just have it to soak up some damage because your opponent will need to get rid of it with their creatures. It's always nice to have a Gideon Blackblade on the field. So the next card is a card that I put in almost exclusively to deal with the Scapeshift decks, so the Field of the Dead decks that get a lot of 2/2 creatures on the battlefield, just to have one way to get rid of them. If your opponent plays a Scapeshift and he has like 36 tokens on the board, you can just play a Flame Sweep and get rid of it. Flame Sweep is something that most of the times you will see in the sideboard of Feather decks, not in the main board. I only play best of one with my deck, so I have it in the main deck to just have one way to counter these decks. Of course, you will need to draw it. It's very unlikely that you draw it when you only have one of them in the deck, but it's better to have a slim chance of winning versus no chance at all of winning. And you will also have a chance to scry away some cards with this deck, and you will need to you will be able to get to some of these cards more quickly than you will usually be able to. So I think it's good to have one of these in the deck. It does cost 3 mana, which is pretty expensive for this kind of deck. You will not be able to bring it back with Dreadhorde Arcanist because it costs 3 mana. You will be able to bring it back, which once I did, if you play Moment of Triumph on the Dreadhorde Arcanist before it attacks, because then it has power 3 and it can bring back 3 mana spells, which Flame Sweep is the only one you will have in your deck. And yeah, that's a combo I used once. So my opponent had a 4 toughness creature on the battlefield. I played Flame Sweep, then I played Moment of Triumph on the Dreadhorde Arcanist and brought back the Flame Sweep in the combat phase. So I got rid of this 4/4 or something that he had. But it's not something you will want to do a lot of times because, yeah, it just costs very much mana to do this. Speaking of a lot of mana, you will have Krenko 10th Street Kingpin as one of your 3 mana cards in the deck. Krenko is a card that can really quickly run away with the game. So it creates 1/1s as much as it has power. And it also gains 1 power and 1 toughness every time it attacks. So it's very, very nice to create some tokens, to create a bright, a white board presence. And you can also combine it with many of your pump spells. So if, for example, if you play Defiant Strike on it, it will have 2/2 at the first time it's able to attack. And it also makes 2 tokens then. You can also play Moment of Triumph to get even more tokens, and you just create so many tokens that your opponent will find it hard to deal with them. Something that is very similar is a Legion Warboss, which you can also play to get a token. You will in contrast to Krenko, you will get a token in the first round, so you can play it and already get a token for the next combat phase, which has to attack, but it also has haste. So it's similar to Krenko, but on the one hand it's not legendary, so you could play a multiple Legion Warboss, which I did for most of the season. And you can only play the one like I do now. It has Mentor, so in the second turn it's on the field. It can pump one of these tokens, which is also nice to get a bigger board presence. To have more 2/2s on the field in contrast to only 1/1s that you get with Krenko. So this is the last card. I already talked about Feather in length. Feather is a really nice card. It has flying. It is very strong, 3/4. It can do this wonderful effect where you bring your cards back, and it's just a very nice card to have in the deck. It's the card you build around, and it's a very nice way to finish up your opponents. This will be the card that you play around. You will need to protect it. You will need to always have a way to protect it against board wipes, against targeted removal, to be able to play the Feather deck well. So this is the first time I did one of these. I hope my English wasn't too bad. You can understand what I was trying to say. I will try to do more of these in the future, and in the next video I will try to explain to you what Feather deck can do against the other decks that are in the meta right now. But for now, I'll leave you with this and hope you liked the video. Hope it will make you a better player. Hope it will also bring you to Mythic, so we can play against each other. Okay, so see you again at the next time.